The digital recorder disappeared beneath the river's surface with a sound so quiet it barely registered. Elias watched the ripples spread outward, carrying away his father's confession. The voice of a man he'd never truly known, now silenced by water and distance. In his pocket, the USB drive held everything else. The names, the amounts, the architecture of a lie built across 3 decades. He turned it over in his fingers through the jacket fabric, feeling its weight. Behind him, Julian knelt on wet grass, shoulders shaking. Ahead, a black car turned onto the road and accelerated, disappearing around a bend. 13 hours earlier, the evening had begun, like any other. Rain drummed against the office windows with the persistence of something that would never stop. Elias sat hunched at the mahogany desk, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the scattered bank statements. The green-shaded banker's lamp cast its narrow pool of light over documents, throwing the rest of the room into shadow. Dusty cardboard boxes crowded the shelves around him. The detritus of his father's estate, still being processed weeks after Arthur Vance's death. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with methodical precision, each second marked by a small mechanical protest. He rubbed his temples with his left hand, a gesture he'd been repeating for the past 2 hours. His fingers were stiff. The office smelled of old paper and dust, the scent of things no longer touched. On the desk in front of him lay a stapled document. Final Trust Disbursement, June 2019. Elias picked it up and ran a yellow highlighter across a single line item. The squeaking sound of the marker on paper was the only noise besides the rain. His breath caught. The text read, "Loan repayment to J. Thorne, $45,000. He whispered into the empty room, "Thorne, why was Julian getting money?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Elias set down the highlighter and opened the silver MacBook Pro to his right. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, entering a password. Maria 2015, his wife's name and their anniversary. The screen flickered from the login prompt to a desktop wallpaper showing the 3 of them years ago, Elias, Maria, and Arthur, on a beach somewhere, all of them smiling in a way that now seemed impossibly naive. The rapid clicking of keys filled the office as Elias navigated to an archived email folder labeled Confidential. His jaw tightened as he scanned through months of correspondence. Then he found it. An email from Arthur Vance to Julian Thorne, dated May 2019. The subject line read, "Proof of the theft." Elias clicked it open. His father's words filled the screen, each one like a small knife. "Julian, I know what you did with the inheritance funds. I have the receipts." The chair squeaked loudly as Elias pushed himself back from the desk, his hands gripping the edges so hard his knuckles turned white. His breathing became shallow. The email stared at him from the screen, accusatory, impossible to unsee. He sat motionless for a long time, watching the cursor blink. Outside, the rain continued its assault on the windows. Thunder rumbled somewhere distant, and the office lighting flickered once, steadied, then continued. Elias remained at the desk, his mind circling the same question. What had his best friend stolen? What had his father known? By the time he stood and grabbed his black leather jacket from the hallway hook, the night had deepened into something heavier than mere darkness. The jacket zipped with a sharp metallic sound. His hands were steady now, but his eyes remained fixed, driven. He walked down the narrow hallway toward the front door and paused. Through the side glass panel, the rain-streaked night came into focus. And then he saw him, a tall figure in a gray hoodie, standing motionless by the mailbox. The figure's face was completely obscured by shadow and the hood pulled low. Elias's breath stopped. He watched for a full 10 seconds. The figure didn't move, didn't look away, didn't acknowledge the presence of anyone watching from behind the glass. Elias threw the door open. The figure bolted. For a moment, Elias hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then instinct took over. His shoes hit the wet asphalt of the driveway, and the chase began. The night was liquid and dark, the rain cold and stinging. Behind him, the house lights spilled weakly into the storm. Ahead, the figure's silhouette cut through the rain like something fleeing for its life. Elias gained ground. The stranger glanced over their shoulder, still obscured, still anonymous. They veered left toward the lawn, their pace faltering slightly in the mud. Elias closed the distance and tackled hard. Both of them crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs and wet grass. They rolled, struggling. Elias got on top, pinning the stranger's arms, pressing his weight down with everything he had. His face splattered with dirt, his breathing ragged. With one violent motion, he ripped the hood backward. It was Julian Thorne. Julian's lip was bleeding, and his eyes were wide with something between panic and resignation. For a moment, neither man spoke. They simply stared at each other in the rain, recognition and betrayal hanging between them like something physical. "Julian?" Elias's voice was a ragged gasp. "You've been watching me?" Julian's throat worked. When he spoke, his voice was shaky but controlled. "I can explain, Elias. I had to see if you found it." Elias shoved harder. "Found what? What did you steal from my father?" Julian threw his weight, and Elias rolled off. Julian scrambled to his feet, his expensive suit already ruined, mud caked across one side. His hand plunged into his pocket and emerged with something small and metallic. An old-fashioned brass key caught the streetlight and gleamed. Julian's voice dropped to something cold and flat. "This wasn't just your father's debt, Elias. He was paying me to stay silent." Rain streamed down both their faces. In the distance, a car passed, headlights briefly illuminating them before the darkness returned. "Silent about what?" Elias demanded. Julian's jaw clenched. "Get in the car. I'll show you." The interior of the black SUV smelled like leather, and the faint scent of air freshener struggling against dampness. Julian sat in the driver's seat, the engine off, rain drumming rhythmically against the metal roof. His hands trembled as he opened the glove compartment and pulled out a leather-bound journal. The leather was worn, peeling at the corners. He handed it to Elias without a word. Elias opened the first page. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's script, precise and controlled. But beneath the text, at the bottom of the page, the signature was forged. The line of initials didn't match anything Arthur would have written. His eyes scanned the page. Names. Local politicians. Dollar amounts. A long list of transactions, each one methodically documented. "What is this?" Elias's voice came out hollow. Julian stared ahead through the windshield at the rain. "Your father's insurance policy. On people who mattered." Elias flipped to the back cover. There was a photograph tucked inside, a Polaroid. The colors faded with time. It showed two men standing in front of a burned-out warehouse, its frame blackened and collapsed. The men were smiling. One was unmistakably Julian's father. The other was Arthur Vance. Handwriting on the photo's white border read, "The sacrifice that made us." Elias's voice came out in pieces. "My father didn't build this family on hard work. He built it on insurance fraud." Julian finally looked at him. A single tear cut a clean line through the mud on his face. He pointed to an entry in the ledger, his finger trembling. "August 12th, 1999, Julian whispered. My father didn't die in an accident, Elias. Your father was the one who locked the door. The words hung in the car like poison gas. Elias stared at them, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. Outside, rain continued its relentless assault on the windshield. The brass key gleamed in Julian's palm. He bought my silence with money. For almost 20 years, I've taken the payments and kept my mouth shut. But 3 months ago, after your father died, the estate lawyers came to me. They were still paying me to stay quiet. They sent me something else too. What? Elias heard himself ask. Julian reached into the back seat and retrieved a manila folder. He opened it and spread surveillance photographs across the center console. Elias recognized them immediately. His wife, Maria at the grocery store, Maria at work, Maria in the park with their daughter. The photos were marked with handwritten notations. Subject A, location 1. Subject A, location 2. Subject A, location 3. Elias's hands formed fists. No, they wouldn't. They told me they'd hurt her if I didn't keep the secret, Julian said, his voice breaking. His hands reached for Elias. I wasn't taking the money for me, Elias. I was paying for protection. For her protection. They said if I talked, if I told you anything, if I even hinted at what was in those documents, they would know. And Maria would pay for it. The car felt suddenly airless. Elias couldn't process the words fast enough. His father, dead for weeks now, had somehow arranged for his wife to be tracked, for Julian to be kept on a leash, for the entire truth to remain buried. We need to get those documents, Elias said quietly. All of them. Now. Julian nodded. They're in storage. I have the key. The Miller's storage facility sprawled across a full city block, a maze of corrugated metal units stacked 3 high. The rain hadn't lessened. If anything, it had intensified, coming down in sheets that made the night nearly impossible to see through. A single set of flickering fluorescent lights illuminated the parking lot. Unit 402 sat in the back corner, away from the main office. The padlock was industrial and rusted. Julian handed Elias the brass key. Elias inserted it into the lock. The mechanism was stiff from years of disuse, but it gave way with a heavy metallic clank that echoed across the empty lot. He pulled the lock free and let it fall. The corrugated metal door rolled up with a mechanical screech. Inside, the beam of Elias's flashlight caught stacks of steel filing cabinets, each one coated in thick gray dust. The air smelled of metal and stagnation. Julian pointed to the cabinet in the corner with a red X taped to it in electrical tape. That one. They moved across the floor, their footsteps hollow in the empty space. Elias reached toward the cabinet when a figure stepped out from behind the stack of wooden pallets. A man in a heavy Carhartt jacket held a copper pipe. His face was obscured in shadow, but his intent was clear. He swung hard and fast, the pipe cutting through the air with a sound like wind. Elias ducked. The pipe hit the metal locker with a deafening ring that made both men's ears ring. The impact sent a tremor through the cabinet. Elias lunged forward, grabbing the man's throat and driving him backward into the locker wall. The man struggled, but Elias had the advantage of surprise and adrenaline. They thrashed together, locked in something between a fight and a collapse. Then Julian moved. He picked up a Maglite flashlight from the floor and brought it down hard across the attacker's temple. The man's eyes rolled back, and he went limp, his body sagging in Elias's grip. The flashlight's lens cracked from the impact. For a moment, the 2 men stood breathing hard, their chests heaving, trying to process what had just happened. Is he alive? Julian managed. Elias checked. The man's breathing was shallow, but steady. Yes. Come on. We don't have much time. Elias ripped open the top drawer of the cabinet marked with the red X. It was filled with manila folders, each one labeled with meticulous precision. Disposal projects, political leverage, family legacy. His fingers flew through them. Then he found it. A legal document dated 3 months prior. Agreement of silence, signed in blue ink by Julian Thorne. Elias's head snapped up. 3 months ago, you didn't just know. You've been getting paid by the estate lawyers to keep this from me. His voice carried the full weight of comprehension. Not just the knowledge that Julian had lied, but that the arrangement had continued well after Arthur's death, well after the point where it could have ended. Julian backed away, his hands rising defensively. He bumped into a stack of boxes. One tipped, and its contents spilled across the floor. Photographs scattered everywhere, catching the flashlight's beam. All of them were of Maria. The color drained from Elias's face. But before he could speak, Julian pointed at a date written on the folder. "Look," Julian said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Look at what they made me do. They made me." A sound interrupted him. The heavy slam of a car door. Then another. Voices, distant but growing closer. "Police?" Julian whispered. Elias moved to the door of the storage unit and looked out. A black and white cruiser was pulling into the lot, its emergency lights flashing blue and red across the rain-soaked pavement. But something about the way it moved was wrong. It didn't brake abruptly. It pulled in slowly, deliberately, as if it knew exactly where it was going. "Not police," Elias said quietly. He grabbed the agreement of silence document and stuffed it into his jacket. His hand shot out, gripping Julian by the collar. 10 minutes. We have maybe 10 minutes before they lock this place down. Where are the rest of the receipts? Julian's eyes darted around the storage unit, then fixed on something at floor level. A maintenance hatch, barely visible beneath a piece of moldy carpet, secured by a metal ring. "Under there," Julian said. "But there's another way out. Through the maintenance tunnels. If we can get below." "Show me," Elias commanded. They moved to the hatch. Julian grabbed the metal ring and pulled. It opened with a groan, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. Below, the sound of rushing water echoed upward. "Go," Elias said. "Now." Julian climbed down the ladder first, disappearing into the darkness. Elias followed, his hands gripping the rungs, his eyes adjusting to the gloom. The air grew colder and wetter as he descended. The bottom of the ladder dropped into a concrete tunnel. Water rushed around his ankles, cold and murky. The smell hit him immediately, raw sewage mixed with metal and decay. Behind him, the ladder extended upward toward the faint light of the storage unit. Julian followed, but on the 4th rung from the bottom, his foot slipped on moss-covered metal. He fell with a heavy splash that sent water in all directions. He let out a sharp cry of pain, immediately cradling his ankle. "Can you move?" Elias asked. "Yes," Julian gasped. "Go. Keep moving." They pressed forward through the tunnel, the water rising to their thighs. Elias's flashlight caught the curved walls of reinforced concrete. Above, metal pipes ran the length of the tunnel, dripping and stained with rust. Then the flashlights appeared above. 2 of them, then 3. Shouting echoed down from the hatch they'd just left. A voice, cold and authoritative. "They're in the tunnel." A gunshot rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet hit the iron ladder, sending sparks cascading into the water like demonic fireflies. "Run!" Elias grabbed Julian and pulled him forward. They splashed through the tunnel, abandoning stealth for speed. Behind them, more footsteps, more shouting. Another gunshot, this one closer. The bullet sang past them and embedded itself in the concrete wall ahead. Elias spotted a smaller side pipe, just large enough for them to squeeze through. He shoved Julian into the opening and followed, pulling himself up and in. The passage was narrower here, the walls slick with algae and fungus. Their flashlights caught glimpses of older tunnels branching off, creating a maze of concrete and metal. They crawled and splashed for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then seemed to stop altogether. But Elias didn't slow. He pushed forward, deeper into the maze, trusting that the tunnel would lead somewhere. Anywhere. Then the passage opened into a larger space. A concrete chamber, dry and sealed, lit only by the beam of Elias's flashlight. In the center of the room sat a single black iron safe. Julian crawled out of the pipe after him, gasping for breath. The safe. The combination is 0812. Elias's hands shook as he approached the safe. His fingers moved over the dial, entering the code Julian had given him. 0812. The tumblers clicked. The heavy door swung open. Inside, sitting on a small shelf, were two items: a digital recorder and a blood-stained handkerchief embroidered with the initials AV in gold thread. Elias reached in with trembling hands. He pulled out both items. The handkerchief was old, the blood so dark with age it looked almost black. The recorder was small and compact, the kind his father had always carried in his pocket for recording board meetings. Dead. The small chambers seemed to shrink around them. Elias stood perfectly still, the recorder in one hand, the handkerchief in the other. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't plead. "Then do it," Elias said flatly. "Finish what my father started. Kill me like he killed yours." Julian's hands shook harder. The barrel wavered. For a long moment, nothing moved except the water dripping somewhere distant in the tunnels. Then Julian's arm dropped. His entire body seemed to collapse in on itself. The gun fell from his fingers to the concrete floor with a clang that echoed through the chamber. Julian sank to his knees, his face in his hands, his whole body racked with sobs. That's when the door to the pipe exploded inward. 3 men in tactical gear poured into the chamber, assault rifles at ready. Red laser dots appeared on the concrete walls, then swept across Elias's chest. The light from their rifle-mounted flashlights created a strobing effect that disoriented and blinded. A tall man with a scarred neck stepped forward. His pistol had a silencer. He looked at Julian, then at Elias. "Julian," the man said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You failed. Mr. Vance's lawyers don't like failures. Step aside." Elias's eyes moved rapidly around the chamber. They caught on something. A gas valve set into the wall behind the enforcer. Old and oxidized, but still connected to active piping that rose toward the street level above. Elias's hand moved to the iron pipe at his feet, part of an old support structure. He picked it up. The motion was quick and decisive. He hurled the pipe with full force directly at the valve. The impact was direct. The valve cracked open. White gas erupted from the break, spraying out in a violent jet that filled the chamber in seconds. The chemical smell hit immediately, acrid and caustic. The enforcers' weapons dropped. They began coughing violently, unable to see through the white haze. The scarred man staggered backward, his pistol hanging loosely at his side. Elias didn't hesitate. He drove forward into the gas cloud, tackling the enforcer. His thumb found the man's eye socket. He pressed hard. The enforcer screamed, a raw, primal sound of agony that cut through the chemical cloud. Julian rose to his feet, pulled by instinct. He grabbed the small pistol from the floor and fired 3 shots into the air. The gunshots created an added layer of chaos, echoing, disorienting, causing the other enforcers to duck for cover. "Come on!" Julian grabbed Elias and pulled him toward a vertical shaft in the corner of the chamber. A ladder led upward. Through the grating at the top, faint streetlight was visible. They scrambled up, gasping, their eyes burning from the gas. Behind them, the gas continued to billow. One of the enforcers had moved back toward the pipe chamber. His lighter was already in his hand. Elias kicked the grating loose just as a muffled explosion erupted below. The force of it carried them upward the last few feet. They rolled onto wet pavement, their bodies hitting hard against concrete and asphalt. A street grate nearby glowed orange as fire licked up from below, creating a small plume that shot maybe 6 feet into the pre-dawn air before dissipating. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Elias and Julian didn't run. They didn't flee. They simply walked away from the grate, back into the shadows between buildings, moving steadily toward the river 3 blocks away. Behind them, emergency vehicles began to converge on the storage facility. The night filled with the sound of sirens and shouting. But by then, Elias and Julian were already gone. The park bench overlooked the river. The wood was damp from hours of rain. Gray light was breaking through the clouds in the east, the kind of dawn that promised to be overcast and cold. Elias sat with the digital recorder in one hand. Julian stood 5 feet away, his ruined suit hanging off his frame like rags, looking at the water. The sun wasn't up yet, but it was coming. The world was in that strange, suspended moment between night and day, where nothing seemed quite real. "Julian," Elias said quietly, "where's the rest of it?" Julian didn't turn around. "I knew this would come to this. I've had years to prepare. After your father died, after the estate lawyers started putting pressure on me, I made copies of everything. Digital copies, everything." He turned and pulled a small USB drive from his pocket. It had a small red light. He walked forward and held it out to Elias. "There's everything," Julian said. His voice was steady now, hollowed out but clear. "The money your father paid me? I didn't spend it. I tracked every person he bribed. Politicians, police officers, judges. It's all here. Names, dates, amounts, bank records, everything." Elias took the drive. His fingers closed around it. He looked Julian in the eye for the first time since they'd emerged from the sewer. "Why?" Elias asked. Julian knelt down on the wet grass. His hands covered his face. His shoulders began to shake with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. "I loved your father like my own," Julian said, his voice fractured. "Even when I knew. Even when I had to watch him buy my silence year after year. I'm so sorry, Elias. I'm so sorry." Elias stood. He held the USB drive in one hand and the digital recorder in the other. The recorder was old, waterlogged now from the tunnel, but it still functioned. His father's voice was preserved on it. The confession, the admission. He walked to the edge of the riverbank. The water below was dark and moving, full of the spring thaw from upstream. Trash from the city collected along the banks, plastic bags, fragments of wood, things no one wanted anymore. Elias drew his arm back and hurled the digital recorder into the center of the river. It caught the light for a second, a small silver glint, then disappeared beneath the surface with a clean, small splash. Ripples spread outward, and the river carried it away. He pocketed the USB drive. His hand reached down and pulled Julian to his feet. They stood together on the wet grass, one man clean, one man covered in filth, their hands interlocking for just a moment before releasing. They walked together toward the parking lot. In the distance, a black car waited. When When they came within 100 feet of it, the engine started. The car pulled out slowly, accelerated, and disappeared around a bend. No one got out. No shots were fired. No final messages were delivered. Just an acknowledgement. And an exit. Elias got into his own car. The engine turned over and purred to life. On the dashboard was a framed photograph of his father, taken years ago at a company function. Arthur was smiling, his arm around Elias's mother, both of them looking impossibly content. Elias reached out and turned the photograph face down. The car accelerated smoothly, merging back onto the main road as the city began to wake. Traffic lights were starting to cycle. A few pedestrians moved along the sidewalks, bracing against the cold wind. The river receded behind them, carrying its secrets downstream. Elias felt the USB drive in his pocket through the fabric of his jacket. He tapped it once, twice. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "Time to clean the house," he said quietly to himself. His hands tightened on the wheel. The road ahead was clear and bright with the promise of dawn. He drove forward, his eyes sharp, his vision bright, fully aware that the worst of this was over, and the actual work was about to begin. There would be lawyers. There would be decisions about what to reveal and what to keep hidden. There would be conversations with Maria that he couldn't yet imagine having. But those were future problems. Right now, the road was clear. The drive was smooth. And for the first time in hours, Elias could breathe.